Hi, I'm here with Dr. Bernie Mayer of the Werner Institute, a lifelong practitioner, researcher, and teacher of conflict negotiation, dispute resolution. And hi, Bernie. Today I'd like us to speak about this notion of raising difficult issues for negotiation.
Yes, I think one of the things that we face is that oftentimes negotiations are set up so that the only thing that is really considered legitimate to talk about is something you can do something about behavior. In other words, I can get some money from you, or you can agree to give me a promotion or a time off for vacation or whatever. And oftentimes, therefore, we feel that's the only thing legitimate to raise.
Right.
But in many circumstances, what we're really dealing with is much more sticky than that. So often, for example, in grievances, people will raise the issue that is about whether the contract was followed or not.
Yeah.
But they won't necessarily feel comfortable raising the issue about the fact that somebody's treating them badly, or is mean to them, or is excluding them, or is just making them feel unwelcome or unwanted. And if you add gender and racial dynamics to this, it even becomes much more complicated that way. And so that would be an example of how important it is sometimes to raise the issue that is not kind of normal or accepted as part of the normal negotiation. And yet those are often what the issue is really about. And another way in which this sometimes happens is that there's an easier issue to raise because it doesn't seem to say you did anything wrong. We just have or I'm not attacking you as a person.
Yeah.
And a more difficult one to raise, such as competence or honesty. I remember having to raise an issue with somebody when I suspected they had stolen some money from an organization I was connected with. Boy, that was hard. I couldn't prove it, but I was damn sure I was right.
Yeah.
And so that was a really difficult one to do. And another thing I think that sometimes happens, we do something that's sometimes referred to as gunny sacking, which is to say we don't want to raise an issue until we are absolutely 100% sure we can prove it, and we have it beyond a shadow of a doubt, and we know exactly what the solution would be. And so by the time we raise it, it's a lot worse than if we had raised it earlier in conditions of more uncertainty.
Right, because now there's not going to be a negotiation. We've moved so far beyond that stage now.
Right.
So what are some things we might do, again, not looking at this from the point of view of a third party, but as someone in negotiation who is facing one of these sticky points? How do we raise the unspeakable or the vague?
Well, first of all, we have to think it's legitimate for us to do that. In some ways, our biggest obstacle is that we think, unless we know the solution, we shouldn't raise the issue.
Right.
Unless we have proof, we shouldn't raise it. So we have to start by assuming, even if we're not sure how to do it, we have to start out by assuming at least it's legitimate to do it.
Yeah.
And I think, in a way, it's best to raise issues where we can accept uncertainty. And where we can accept that maybe we don't know the whole story, because we never do. Yeah. That there are other points of view that are legitimate, that we have a right to raise our issue, a right to our concerns and our feelings and our beliefs, but so do the other people. And that we're open to hearing that, even though we may not be open to change our view because we're pretty convinced of it. Yeah. So I knew when I raised the issue about the other person having misused money that I didn't really know the whole story. Yeah. And that I was going to get a lot of defensive nonsense back, frankly, and I did. I had somebody else in the room with me, that was important. But I didn't back off. I said, well, I'm still concerned about this. And I don't know what else to tell you, but I'm not convinced, I'm still concerned. It really seems very likely that this is what happened. I don't want to accuse you of something that didn't do, but this is how the situation looks like to me. And eventually, We had a reasonable discussion. Eventually, the person actually fessed up in that particular circumstance.
But what's important is that there was a reasonable conversation.
Right. It was a reasonable conversation, and it was made reasonable by the fact that I neither backed off of my own concerns nor assumed that I understood the whole situation. And I didn't wait until I had all that evidence, because I wasn't trying to make a case in court.
And there seems to be a big difference, whether it's kind of psychologically or psychic energy-wise, between a topic that you are holding completely in your hands or in your heart and not raising, then it is your issue and your problem, and something that you have put on the table and said, whether I know what to do with this or not, whether I know the whole story or not, this is at least 50% yours, and
right.
I'm going to relieve myself of at least half the weight just by putting it out there.
Right.
In its own self, that seems like
right. And putting it out there with just the degree of certainty or uncertainty we feel.
Yeah.
Because I think sometimes, in order to kind of buck ourselves up to feel strong enough to put something out there, we have to act with so much certainty.
Yeah.
That we actually close down an interaction. I oftentimes want to say to people in conflict and negotiation, be less certain.
Yeah.
Be just as certain as you are. Don't minimize your certainty. Don't maximize it.
That's kind of avoiding using your own terms. Kind of avoid over engagement.
Right.
I think this is very helpful. In particular, since so many negotiation examples in negotiation courses, including this course, tend to kind of gravitate towards those nameable, quantifiable, transactional kind of examples and stories and
I think lawyers call it colorable.
Yeah, and as we promised our students in the course description, and as I really believe, what we're learning here is applicable to so many different relationships, and in those different relationships, things are never colored in, and things are rarely, we're here to talk about this, and there's an agenda on the door as you walk in. So I think this is a great topic to raise.
Right. Let me just maybe say one other thing too. I think we err more often by not raising issues that could be constructively aired. However, we all have to choose, and they're all issues we choose to avoid, and that's a legitimate choice too.
So you're saying in the end we still need to make wise decisions about what we decide to raise, and the fact that we have an issue and could raise it is not in itself. It's a fact that a reason to put it on the table.
Just because we could raise it doesn't mean we should raise it, and in a negotiation, sometimes when we find ourselves in finally a discussion about issues we're concerned about, we sometimes think that's the opportunity to raise everything we're concerned about. And that's often dilutes the purpose of what we're there for. So if I'm there to discuss a concern about your timeliness at work, it may not be the time to raise every other issue I have a concern with. I think that's important.
So we need to continue to make wise decisions along the way, and not just one wise decision at the door.
Right.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Bernie.
My pleasure.